The summit between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin, held at the joint base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska, represented a significant moment in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This war, now spanning several years, has evolved into one of the most complex and devastating conflicts in recent history, deeply affecting regional stability, international relations, and millions of lives. The meeting was intended to serve as a high-level diplomatic effort to address the ongoing hostilities and seek a path toward peace, or at minimum, a ceasefire. Both leaders recognized the enormous stakes involved, not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for global security and economic stability. Despite these shared interests, the talks exposed the wide gulf in objectives and positions held by the two sides. At the core of the conflict is the issue of territory. Since the conflict escalated in 2014 and more dramatically in 2022, Russia has occupied approximately 20% of Ukraine's territory. This includes Crimea, annexed in 2014, and several eastern and southern regions such as Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Russia's position, firmly stated by President Putin, is that these territories rightfully belong to Russia and should be recognized internationally as such. Putin has also insisted that Ukraine must abandon its efforts to join NATO and declare neutrality to ensure Russian security interests are protected. Ukraine, however, holds an opposing view. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian government maintain that any forced territorial concessions are unacceptable. The Ukrainian constitution forbids the ceding of any part of the nation's territory, and public sentiment within Ukraine overwhelmingly supports maintaining the country's current borders. The government insists that peace must come without sacrificing sovereignty and that security guarantees are necessary to prevent future aggression. The absence of President Zelenskyy from the summit was a significant and contentious aspect. Not inviting the Ukrainian leader drew criticism internationally, as it sidesteps the fundamental principle that those directly affected by the conflict must have a seat at the negotiation table. Many European and Western officials voiced concerns that excluding Ukraine risks marginalizing its interests and could lead to agreements that do not fully reflect the realities and aspirations of the Ukrainian people. From a military standpoint, the situation on the ground remains highly volatile. Russian forces continue their efforts to consolidate control over occupied territories and make incremental advances despite significant losses. The front lines stretch over hundreds of miles, with intense fighting in various regions. Ukraine's armed forces have mounted effective resistance and launched counter-offensives targeting key Russian military infrastructure and supply chains. Both sides have suffered considerable casualties and equipment losses, and civilian populations continue to bear the brunt of the conflict, facing displacement, infrastructure destruction, and humanitarian crises. Economically, the war has imposed heavy costs. International sanctions against Russia aim to restrict its access to capital, technology, and markets, aiming to degrade its ability to finance the war. These measures, while impactful, have not yet compelled Russia to halt its military campaign. The United States and its allies have indicated readiness to increase sanctions further should Russia remain intransigent. Meanwhile, Ukraine depends heavily on continued foreign aid and arms shipments to sustain its defense, but there is uncertainty about how long this support can be maintained at current levels, especially as donor countries face their own economic challenges. Diplomatically, the summit's failure to produce a ceasefire or any formal agreement signals the complexity of the conflict and the deep divisions among the parties involved. Both presidents indicated willingness to continue dialogue, but the lack of tangible progress suggests that bridging the fundamental disagreements will be challenging. The summit highlighted how difficult it is to reconcile Russia's territorial ambitions and security demands with Ukraine's insistence on sovereignty and territorial integrity. The broader geopolitical context adds further complexity. NATO and European nations have largely supported Ukraine's resistance and have been wary of Russia's expansionist actions. They advocate for Ukraine's right to self-defense and have called for Russia's withdrawal from occupied territories. The prospect of Ukraine's NATO membership remains a highly sensitive issue, with Russia viewing it as a direct threat, while Ukraine and its supporters see it as essential for long-term security. Public opinion in Ukraine remains resolute, with widespread opposition to any territorial concessions. Civilians and military personnel alike are deeply invested in defending the country's sovereignty. The humanitarian situation is dire, with millions displaced internally and abroad, significant infrastructure damage, and ongoing challenges in delivering aid and rebuilding affected areas. Looking forward, it is clear that the path to peace will require more than high-profile summits between major powers. It will demand the inclusion of Ukraine as an active participant in negotiations, recognition of its rights and needs, and compromises from all sides. Confidence-building measures, security guarantees, and phased approaches to resolving territorial disputes may be necessary steps. In the meantime, the war continues to have profound impacts on global security, economic stability, and humanitarian conditions. The summit underscored the urgent need for renewed diplomatic efforts, but also the realities of entrenched positions and ongoing conflict. The situation remains fluid and challenging. The international community watches closely, hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough but preparing for continued instability in the near term.